So I would like to warmly welcome and thank Sister Helen Alford for the honor of giving us the opportunity to interview her for the occasion of this conference of KETEG on the topic of digital communication versus personal connection. And please allow me the opportunity to briefly introduce Sister Helen Alford to our audience today. You belong to the Dominican Sisters of Saint Catherine of Siena, graduated originally in the UK in manufacturing and engineering at the University of Cambridge, where you have also received your PhD from. And you are now a full professor of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas, the Angelicum in Rome, of which you are also the vice rector. And most recently, you have become an ordinary member of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. So welcome, Sister Helen. Thank you very much for being here with us. And I would like to start out with a question. You have been extensively researching and publishing in the area of human development and integral human development. So how do you see the current situation of communication from this perspective?
Okay, well, thank you so much, Roland, and thank you to all the organizers of KETEG. It's really great to be in contact with KETEG again, because I think it's really a wonderful program. It's one of the key programs in Europe for connecting Christian tradition with economic changes. And of course, digital communications, it's a technical issue, but it's also being pushed by economic actors that see it as a major business opportunity as well. So, your question was about how I think technological issues were affecting communication. Is it right? Sorry.
Yes, technological issues and human development. Related aspect as well. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, maybe first we should say something about human development, because it's really important to know what we're talking about if we're talking about communication and human development. Well, I think in some ways it's a really interesting topic, because in some ways there's quite a lot of agreement about what human development is. But sometimes this agreement isn't what it seems. I think let's start from the point of view of the Catholic tradition. Catholic tradition would see human development very much in terms of basic human nature, which has some basic tendencies, which can be then in all kinds of different ways developed in different cultures, in different language situations, in different historical circumstances. So there's a combination between something that we share as human beings and certain basic things that we all need, and a huge range of freedom to be able to develop according to one's individual interests and background, but also in relation to particular culture, which could be language, history, a particular territorial area, and so on. That's one factor. Another factor we can mention in relation to Christian thought and human development is very strong use of the virtue tradition. And this also helps us think about Catholic tradition in relation to what's good and what's not so good in the modern tradition. Because in the virtue tradition, freedom is more about freedom for than freedom from. It's more about what we can become than how we need to be kind of given just free choice. And the sort of barriers to our choice is taken away. Now, it's true that we need some freedom of choice. That's certainly true. But the modern tradition tends to give only interest to this. And it's part of a bigger issue that has come to the fore since the 1750s. And there's lots of good reasons, historical reasons why that happened. But anyway, we don't need to go into that. But I think one of the the big problems we have to deal with today, and we see it in relation to human development, but we also see it in relation to things like the climate crisis or to dealing with the pandemic or many other issues, is that we think that each one of us should be free to define what the goals of our life are. We don't share any common goals in terms of where we should go. What we do share is the means to get there. And of course, that means money has a really important role, but it also has things like policies or laws. These kinds of things are discussed a lot, and they're certainly important for us. But as we can see with the climate crisis, as we can see also with things like sustainable development goals, which have goals for us to try to achieve, which are not only instrumental, we're kind of pushing now in our society towards trying to find some shared goals, that solution that the Enlightenment found in the 1750s, given the 6 historical circumstances they were in, doesn't really work anymore. And we need to find better ways of defining together the goals that we're working towards. So what does that mean in terms of communication? Well, I think we could look at this in 2 levels. One is the sort of economic environment that communication is part of now. If we think about digital communication, we're talking mostly about platforms which are owned by big companies. Of course, the big names would be Google, Facebook, these kinds of companies. And they have a certain business model, which is not really all that helpful in terms of helping us develop as human beings. It's making them a lot of money, but it's not really promoting human development. Why? Because basically these systems are about selling advertising. All the rest of it that goes on, all the social contact, all the rest of it is just kind of collateral. The main business model is get us to look at their websites, look at our phones for as long as possible, attract our attention for as long as possible, and get us to see the advertising so that then they can earn money. So so on the economic level, we have a bit of a problem in terms of communication. On the technical level, well, it's true that these communication systems are helping us to connect in a way which is corporally distinct. You know, we're not necessarily with each other in a physical way, and that is a lack for us. You know, if we look at the way children develop, for instance, they need to touch things, they need to put things in their mouths, they need, you know, we need a lot of physical contact with things to learn. Now, when we get older, we can learn without such a strong play or component of the physical level, but it's never completely gone. You know, so it's still part of who we are. And so communicating without that is in some ways a loss, but it is also an opportunity, you know. And I think the Catholic tradition would always say that, you know, we have some natural communities like families or language groups or local territorial communities. These are natural communities that we belong to, but human beings are also one family in the sense under God, one created community, species, and therefore things that can help us connect beyond that, beyond what's local, beyond, isn't necessarily a bad thing. It could help us develop in another way. So I think probably I would say that the technological side is a bit open. It depends how it's developed. But like a lot of technological change, it's often really conditioned by the economic factors, which are pushing it in one way or the other. You know, we can have technological development, which is really supporting human development. What Lewis Mumford, in his great book published in the 1930s called Biotechnics, long before there was biotechnology as we know today, but the whole idea of his biotechnics was that technological development can be inserted into a way of life and supports the development of that way of life. And then he had this other idea that technological development can be what he calls monotechnics, where what's happening really is that one group of people is dominating the wider group of people using the technology. And in fact, he uses the oldest example of that as the creation of the pyramids, which you had almost no technology in the sense that we understand it. The technology, the machine, was the way the slaves were organized. The human beings were turned into a kind of a machine, that each of the human beings were just a component of a big machine to build the pyramid. And so he would argue that is a kind of monotechnics, even though there's no machine in the sense that we understand it today, because the mindset was there of controlling people through using a technological approach to do it. And that, I think a lot of different thinkers, I use Mumford as the most kind of graphic example, but many other thinkers would say we have these two kinds of technological development before us, and we can go one way or the other. And in different times of history, one or other is more dominant. Perhaps we could say that the green technology today might be an example of a rise again of a kind of biotechnics, where the technology is supposed to be inserted into a sustainable way of life with regard to the planet. So I would say our communications, in terms of technology, we should look at it on these two levels: technical level, but also economic level, and how we understand this technological development in relation to human development, which is, of course, the first question you asked me.
Yeah, you've touched on so many exciting topics. Maybe just one, which is your earlier ideas about the human nature and virtuous development. And in the pandemic, we learn and we have gained a lot of new questions. And one of the questions: what do we know about human nature in terms of our basic natural need for social relations? We have a pandemic now. We might have a much more serious pandemic, much more deadly pandemic. Does the human nature require the communication, the connection, face-to-face, real person outside the nuclear family? What do we know about this? If we have, let's say, in a few years' time, an extremely serious pandemic, can we survive that? Human nature, can we survive that with technology without connection to broader society?
Well, I think you're asking a really good question, and I think I can give a partial answer to it, but I think that the pandemic will help us to give a more complete answer to it, because it will inspire researchers to answer in a more complete way the question that you're asking now. But on a sort of just on the basis of what we know, I would say we have basically two different kinds of knowledge that can help us answer the question that you are placing to us. The older kind of knowledge is philosophical, but it also comes out of religious traditions. We might call these the wisdom traditions. It's a term that's been used in academic literature to describe millennial traditions of thought, which have really tried to synthesize vast amounts of experience in their way of thinking about what it means to be human. And also, for instance, if we take Christian tradition, but we could also take some other traditions, try to take what is understood within that tradition as a revelation from a divine revelation, and use that too to help us understand what is the good in the human life, what does it mean to be human, and all those kinds of things. So I think if we start from that side of things, which is the older side, we would say that definitely we would recognize that there's a very strong social component to human life. And we can see it in all kinds of ways. For instance, if you think about something like the 10 Commandments in the Old Testament, we have 3 commandments at the beginning, which are in relation to God. We can also see those as a kind of social relation as well. But the rest of them are mostly to do with our relations with other people. So, 7 out of 10 are to do with relations with other people. so many moral systems, ethical systems, legal systems. Much of these systems, which are, thousands of years old, some of them, are really focused on how to help us to live well together. So this idea that, the sort of natural condition of a human being is to be on his own, is a sort of odd idea. And even if you look at some of the literature that looks at that, say Robinson Crusoe, there's a famous novel that looks at the man on his own. I mean, of course, all writers are much more, they're not trying to propose a particular ideology, they're thinking in narrative terms. Of course, the really good thing that happens to Robinson Crusoe is that Friday shows up, and he has this other person who's with him. And so, it doesn't really support this idea in the end, the book, that we're really individuals and that being social is something problematic for us. So we could say a lot more about those kinds of traditions, but now more and more we have really interesting empirical scientific results, which are also giving us insight into this aspect of human life. So we're talking about things like genetics, neuroscience, behavioral economics. I mean, these would be the areas that I know more about. And it's really extraordinary. I mean, perhaps the most extraordinary thing I could say to you is you may probably know that there's a very famous book that was published second half of the 20th century by Richard Dawkins called The Selfish Gene, talking about how the really important things in human existence are the genes. The genes are the things which are trying to pass themselves off from one generation to another. So what's really important is the genes. And in the 30th anniversary edition of that book, in the preface to that edition, he said, given what's happened subsequently in genetics research, I have to say that I could have called this book The Cooperative Gene, not the selfish gene. So genetic research is showing us more and more that actually there's a kind of a selection in human evolution, in human groups, which is helping us to be more cooperative. That's actually really valuable to us on a very, very basic survival level, very, very important in relation to economics as well, not just in terms of having a good family life or being a religious person or anything like that. Really, really basic survival issues. And then also game theory in behavioral economics is also showing us how we value relationships in themselves. They are not just instrumental to gaining my goals, but I value the relationships and I want to build relationships because they're good for me. So we don't have this very clear distinction between the individual's preferences, individual's objectives, and then everybody else I just cooperate with insofar as they help me gain my individual objectives. That's really a very, very inadequate model now, insofar as the empirical results are pushing us to see human beings in a much more relational way out of all these modern sciences. So to come back to your original question, could the digital mechanism help us have these social relations? Well, I would say it's a really new situation for us to consider this. And I would say probably in some ways they could help us, but if we don't use this tool properly, it could also damage us. That would be pretty much what's happened with technology in the past. We can find good ways of using new technologies, but we can also end up allowing them to damage us. So what we need to do now is really understand better, and I think a lot of people will be doing research on this now, how can technology help us further our relational capacities, and how do we need to maintain connection with the what we know already, the face-to-face, the physical connection? Where do we need to make the distinction? I certainly can't answer that right now. Maybe there are some people who answer better than me, but I would guess that there's going to be a lot of development in that sphere. And maybe if we came back to this 2 years from now, we could say a lot more about it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And maybe just another two topics combined in one question. One of your expertise in technology development, and the other one is what I think is very interesting here is the time dimension of our goals and the time dimension of technology development. So if you look at the recent development of communication technologies, social media and so on, how do you see the ethical dimension of these developments? And I mean, we know now, it seems to be quite clear now that social media usage, especially for young people, is actually doing quite a lot of damage. And it might be that the companies have been knowing this for quite a significant time. So how do you see this with technology development and the responsibility of taking care that it's not doing damage, precaution, that you don't introduce technologies too early without knowing the long-term potential damage? How should we approach this? What can we learn from history?
Yeah, I think what we learn from history is that we have two kinds of things going on. One is that we have a kind of way of thinking about technology which is trying to be precautionary, as you're talking about, is trying to stop things happening which are negative, and that is often interpreted by people who want to push technology forward as kind of Luddite. We talk about in UK, we had this tradition in the early Industrial Revolution where these groups smashed up machines because they saw them as damaging the workplace for workers, and it was seen as very negative by people who thought technology was the solution for our problems. So, so often these people who are trying to apply a precautionary principle are seen as backward, as conservative, as not allowing us to find the right solutions, that we'll find the right solutions anyway. But in fact, these people often do a lot of good. They are treated as pretty bad often by the more progressive kind of groups in society, but they actually have a very, very positive, in the end, when we look back over history, positive contribution. Then we have the others who are trying to push things, who are trying to say, look, we don't know how we can use this technology yet. We should just try it. We should see how it goes, And I think if these technologies are not connected with economic players who are too powerful and who are trying to impose their view on everybody else, then maybe that group also does quite a lot of good. Sometimes it will do something negative as well. But I think the problem comes when we have, as someone like Shoshana Zuboff is talking about in her Surveillance Capitalism book, or James Williams in Stand Out of Our Light book, talking about how really big companies like Facebook, Google, and that are using the best engineers coming out of really good engineering programs to get them to devise the most effective ways of distracting young people, to keep them connected to their phones, to stop them sleeping, to keep them watching what's going on, and it's a kind of what James Williams calls an adversarial technology, or what Lewis Mumford would call a monotechnic technology, where one group is getting a benefit out of it, financial, but most people are being damaged by it. And unfortunately, this is not new in history. This is a new version of it that we're experiencing now. But on the positive side, we can say we are not without experience about how to deal with this kind of technology. And our experience in the past has been that in the end, we do find a way to sort of get a better balance with it. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of pain, a lot of suffering and a lot of problems in the meantime. And if we can try to minimize these, well, of course, I think we're all winners from that. So why this discussion that you're having now is really, really important, because I think that's one of the things you're trying to do.
Yes. No, and I mean, examples, like you said, from business life, like if you think about the tobacco industry, I think the real scandal was when it turned out that they have known decades earlier the negative health effects, and there were no really strict policies against the tobacco use, young people, and so on. And I'm wondering, I think we've reached the scandal status with some of these communication technologies. And it seems like once again the legislation is very late about trying to develop the right social policies for the usage of this technology.
Well, I mean, I think you're right. I would say though that we in Europe are in a better position than some of the other parts of the world, even though we could say there's lots of problems. But I think most people would recognize that Europe at least is really trying to face the issue, compared much better than, say, United States or especially China. And so, the fact that you're having this discussion here in KETEG and a country like Hungary is pushing within the European context for this kind of discussion, it's really important, because we are contributing to probably what is the leading debate in the world, and which can have an impact on other parts of the world, even though we don't have the most powerful companies in this part of the world that are dealing with that. But, but we could be the innovators in terms of the legal system and the ethical system and the way in which it's being used in society, and in the end of the day, that's just as important, if not more. So, I think it's we have to keep trying to deal with this issue, Human life is about confronting our weakness, our sin, the negativity in the world, and this is one of the areas where we have to confront it. Absolutely.
Yes. So maybe as we are reaching towards the end of our time, and try to bring it maybe closer to the personal, actionable side of our audience. And with these technologies, I think many of us struggle, and we seem to have a situation of swimming against the stream, because everything is pushing us into a direction that we know might be not the best for us. Do you have, maybe from the virtual tradition or anywhere else, any good suggestion for a parent who is struggling with these communication technologies for his parents, or a teacher, or just any Christian person? How could we, live a good life under these circumstances and communication technology streams?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really good question, and it's hard to give a general answer to that, because it depends a lot on the specific circumstances that someone is in. But for instance, I could give you the example of some groups which are trying to influence big economic players with a kind of way of thinking which could get them to think about human dignity, for instance. So, for instance, Blueprint for Better Business is trying to get it's mostly working with people in the financial sector. So it's not directly in terms of technology, but of course, a lot of these players are investing in technology and influencing what's going on in technology. But, if you think, if a big business thought about human beings in terms of the dignity of their customers, they probably wouldn't treat them in the same way that they do now. I think primarily they think often of customers in the way that economic theory would teach them to think about their customers, which is their kind of stimulus response mechanism. And we have to stimulate them to buy our product, because if we don't do that, somebody else is going to do it, and we just have to get in there. And whereas if we get enough businesses, a kind of critical mass, to start thinking, we don't want our children to be treated like that. Why should we treat other people's children like that? Let's think about how we could serve their dignity. So we start to think about, what could we do that really promotes dignity. Now, if you get really good engineers and really good managers and really good marketing people working on that, they'll come up with some amazing answers to that question. They can do it. They just need to be given the direction. So I think one of the hopeful things we can do is try to get big businesses to really believe that it's possible to behave like this. And I think after the financial crisis and in the face of the climate crisis, and that people are beginning to think, not only we can do it, but we have to do it, you know. And these groups are offering some tools which come out of the Christian tradition, but also come out of interreligious traditions, the wisdom traditions that we're talking about, that have a huge amount of experience to help us deal with that. And what we need is to create tools that can help that knowledge be passed into the business sphere, so it can actually be actionable and affect the outcomes of these business processes which are producing products and services and all that kind of thing. So, you know, some of that is happening. The economy of Francisco is another kind of big movement that's trying to bring young people together to deal with that. I'm sure we could find, you know, if we talk to James Williams, for instance, who's a former Google engineer who wrote that book, Stand Out of Our Life, I bet you he could tell us about groups of engineers who were working on different kinds of tools to deal with them. I bet we would find, you know, I'd have to look for it now afterwards, but I bet we would find there are small businesses in Europe that are trying to promote a different kind of experience, online experience for young people and communications and that kind of thing. So, you know, I think we need to be very much with our eyes open, not naive, but not despairing, because this is a major technological change, but we've had major technological changes in the past, and we can deal with this. We dealt with the other ones. We can deal with this too, and exactly what you're trying to do in this project, in this meeting, is going to contribute to be able to deal with it better, to get this technology to support the development of human life, development of young people, development of families, you know, development of local communities. It can be done, you know, and so we have to do it.
Thank you, Sister Helen. Thank you so much for your kindness to be here for us for this interview, and also especially for your words of sharing your knowledge and encouragement for us not to fall into despair, but instead into hope. So thank you very much. Have a great day, and we are looking forward to seeing you in the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you to all your listeners. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.